As time passed, Dahmer became increasingly confident that he could continue his crimes without being discovered. This false sense of security allowed his behavior to become even more reckless. Neighbors in the apartment complex occasionally reported strange incidents. Some residents mentioned hearing unusual noises late at night, while others complained about a persistent and unpleasant odor coming from Dahmer's apartment. The smell became one of the most frequently discussed issues among tenants. Several neighbors later said that it was strong enough to make them uncomfortable in the hallway. When confronted about it, Dahmer calmly explained that a freezer had broken and that some meat had spoiled, because the explanation seemed plausible. Many people accepted it and did not investigate further. At the time, no one suspected that the odor might be connected to something far more disturbing. Dahmer also developed routines that helped him avoid drawing attention. He often carried bags or containers out of his apartment at night, claiming he was simply taking out trash or moving belongings. In reality, investigators would later discover that these actions were part of his attempts to dispose of evidence related to his crimes. Despite his efforts to remain unnoticed, Dahmer occasionally displayed behavior that others found unsettling. Some neighbors described him as extremely quiet, but also strangely intense during brief conversations. Former co-workers also remembered that he sometimes spoke about unusual topics or appeared disconnected from social situations. However, none of these behaviors seemed alarming enough to prompt serious concern at the time. Psychologists who later studied the case suggested that Dahmer's ability to appear calm and ordinary was a key factor in how long he was able to continue his crimes. Many serial offenders rely on this same pattern, presenting themselves as harmless individuals while secretly engaging in dangerous activities. Dahmer's apartment gradually became a place filled with disturbing objects and hidden evidence. Investigators would later describe the scene as one of the most shocking crime scenes they had ever encountered. Inside the apartment, authorities eventually discovered photographs documenting victims, containers with human remains, and other items that revealed the full extent of Dahmer's actions. The discovery of these items would later horrify both investigators and the public. However, before the case finally came to light, there were several moments where the situation nearly unfolded earlier. On more than one occasion, police were called to the apartment building because of complaints or unusual situations. In most cases, Dahmer managed to convince officers that nothing serious had happened. His calm demeanor and ability to provide simple explanations often prevented deeper investigation. These moments later became important parts of the story, raising questions about how the crimes were able to continue for so long without being discovered. Looking back, many people believe that the signs were present but misunderstood. Neighbors had noticed strange smells. Some had observed unusual behavior. Yet none of these clues alone seemed enough to reveal the horrifying truth. It was only when a victim managed to escape and contact authorities that the entire situation began to unravel. That moment would ultimately lead investigators to the apartment and expose one of the most disturbing criminal cases in modern American history. As Dahmer's crimes continued, his behavior became increasingly dangerous and erratic. Neighbors in the apartment building often noticed strange smells coming from his unit. Some described the odor as similar to rotting meat or chemicals. When questioned, Dahmer would calmly explain that his refrigerator had broken or that some meat had spoiled. These explanations were often accepted without further investigation. Many residents felt uneasy, but could not imagine the true cause of the disturbing odor. Dahmer also displayed unusual behavior in public places. He frequently visited local bars, where he would quietly observe people rather than actively socialize. He often carried himself in a nervous and withdrawn manner, avoiding prolonged conversations. Despite this awkward demeanor, Dahmer was capable of appearing polite and harmless. This allowed him to gain the trust of strangers who had no idea of his intentions. Over time, Dahmer's methods became more disturbing. He attempted to create what investigators later described as living victims. In several cases, he experimented with drugs and chemicals in an attempt to control or immobilize the people he brought to his apartment. These attempts revealed the extent of Dahmer's psychological disturbance. Rather than simply committing murder, he appeared obsessed with maintaining control over his victims even after death. During the later investigation, police would discover that Dahmer carefully documented many of his crimes. Photographs found in his apartment showed evidence of disturbing rituals and attempts to preserve parts of the human body. The apartment itself became a hidden crime scene. Ordinary furniture concealed horrifying secrets that investigators would later uncover. What made the case even more shocking was how long these crimes continued without being discovered. For years, Dahmer managed to avoid serious suspicion. Several interactions with police occurred during this time, but none of them revealed the full truth. In one particularly disturbing incident, officers briefly encountered a victim who had managed to escape. However, Dahmer convinced them that everything was under control, and the victim was returned to the apartment. This moment later became one of the most controversial aspects of the investigation. Many people questioned how such a critical opportunity to stop the crimes had been missed. The case highlighted failures in communication, assumptions made by authorities, and the tragic consequences of those mistakes. By the time the truth was finally revealed in 1991, Dahmer had committed a series of crimes that would become one of the most infamous cases in modern criminal history. In July 1991, the truth about Jeffrey Dahmer finally began to emerge. One of his intended victims managed to escape from the apartment and alert the police. When officers arrived and entered Dahmer's apartment, they quickly discovered evidence that confirmed their worst fears. Inside the apartment were photographs documenting the crimes and human remains that proved the scale of the atrocities. The discovery shocked investigators and soon captured international media attention. Authorities realized they were dealing with one of the most disturbing serial killer cases in American history. During the trial, Dahmer confessed to numerous murders and provided chilling details about his actions. The court ultimately found him guilty of multiple counts of murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison. The case of Jeffrey Dahmer remains one of the most infamous true crime cases ever recorded. It continues to be studied by criminologists and psychologists, seeking to understand how such extreme crimes can occur. For many people, the story serves as a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous individuals are those who appear the most ordinary. Jeffrey Dahmer was born in 1960 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. During his childhood, his parents noticed that he often preferred to be alone. He struggled socially and had difficulty forming relationships with other children. As Dahmer grew older, his behavior became increasingly troubling. He developed a fascination with dead animals and anatomy, which concerned those around him. However, the full extent of his disturbing interests remained hidden. In his early adulthood, Dahmer began frequenting bars and areas where he could meet young men. He often targeted individuals who were vulnerable or alone. Dahmer would offer them money or invite them to his apartment to drink. Once inside the apartment, the situation would turn deadly. Dahmer used drugs to incapacitate his victims before carrying out his violent acts. Afterward, he carefully attempted to hide the evidence. Over time, his crimes escalated. Dahmer began photographing his victims and keeping body parts as disturbing trophies. These actions revealed a deeply disturbed psychological state. Despite the strange smells and unusual behavior reported by neighbors, Dahmer avoided suspicion for years. Many people who briefly interacted with him had no idea that such horrific crimes were happening just behind his apartment door. The secrecy and duration of these crimes made the case even more shocking once the truth was finally uncovered. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, the city of Milwaukee appeared quiet and ordinary. Families lived normal lives, and few imagined that one of the most disturbing criminals in American history was living among them. Jeffrey Dahmer seemed like an unremarkable neighbor. He kept to himself, rarely caused trouble, and avoided attention. To those who briefly encountered him, he appeared shy and socially awkward rather than threatening, but behind the door of his small apartment, a horrifying reality existed. Dahmer was responsible for a series of brutal crimes that shocked investigators and disturbed the entire world. For years, he lured young men to his apartment with promises of money, companionship, or a place to drink. What followed would later be described as one of the darkest chapters in modern criminal history. This is the disturbing case of Jeffrey Dahmer, the man who would become known as the Milwaukee Monster.